All right, we. All right, we good? Oh. All right, evening. How we doing? All right. Just to give you, my name is Trooper Klewicki. I work at the State Police. I'm just going to give you a little bit of my background, kind of so you know where I'm coming from. The reason I got out here was I did a presentation at Courier Plastics for active shooter, and Dave was nice enough to give me the invite to come to your church and talk to you about some of the topics with churches. Between workplaces and churches, there's a few differences. Obviously, churches have different concerns, which we'll talk about. But I will try to, hopefully I'll cover everything that you may have questions on, but if not, feel free to reach out afterwards and I'll be happy to get you some resources and things like that. So just to give you an idea of my background, I started my career out in the Adirondacks, which was a very different way of policing. It was no cell phones out there, because even if you did have a cell phone back in the day, which I don't think we had them until early 2000s, the cell towers didn't work anyway. So if I got a call from my station and they wanted me to call the station, I had to pull into a mobile station or a restaurant and say, hey, can I borrow your phone? So you got to know everybody in your community. And it was very tight. Everybody knew who I was. They knew I was a local trooper. They'd come to me if they had a problem, and I knew who everybody else was. And I basically most of the time knew who to go to if I was having a situation. So then I took a break in military service. I was in the National Guard, and I transferred out to Rochester. Rochester was a whole different animal. It was like being on live PD or cops. I'd never seen a stolen vehicle in my state police life. My first week in Rochester, I'm chasing a stolen vehicle around the inner loop, and there's a 14-year-old driving it that crashes. It's crazy. So I recognized that in the city, when I was in the Adirondacks, I tell somebody, turn around, put your hands behind your back, you're under arrest. They did it. That's pretty cool. And so I thought that's how it worked. And I got to Rochester, I said, turn around, put your hands behind your back, and they're like 3 chain link fences over running away from me. So I realized that I need to kind of pick up. I was never a fighter, never a wrestler in high school, so I wanted some extra training. So I signed up to be a defensive tactics instructor, and that's how I kind of got my background in teaching and instructing. I became a defensive tactics instructor, and essentially we had 5 instructors at the time. 3 of them jumped ship, 1 got suspended, so I was basically thrown in the deep end doing a lot of instruction. And what I found is that what drove me, I never really wanted to be a teacher, but what drove me was the first time I taught somebody a defensive tactic, and they did it, and they came back to me like 6 months later and said, hey, you know that technique you taught me? It was amazing. I did it on the roadside, it worked, I got the guy in custody, and I didn't get hurt. It was great. And so that's where I really started getting my drive of teaching people how to protect themselves, how to be safe. So about 5 years ago, I took over the school and community outreach unit. So right now, my full-time job is to go out into schools, businesses, and community groups and talk on topics of safety and law enforcement, basically teaching civilians how to be safer about what they do. So that's kind of my background, where I'm coming from, and we'll get into a little bit more. I made this presentation a long time ago. I shouldn't say a long time. It's 2 years ago, I think. I was supposed to be the secondary presenter. My main presenter was supposed to be handling the main mission, the main presentation, and I was just going to be the wingman. And he ends up bailing out, getting sick or something like that. I can't remember what the situation was. So that was my joke, that I was supposed to be the wingman, I was supposed to be Goose, and I ended up having to be Maverick. So why are we here today? Obviously, there's a lot of things going on in the communities that is pretty disturbing. We've had a lot of situations in churches. Unfortunately, churches are soft targets. And these people that are committing these acts are not looking for a fair fight. They're looking for something where they can get a lot of casualties quickly and not have much confrontation. And so, unfortunately, a lot of our places that are easy access, easy to get into, not highly defended. I mean, when you think about schools are really secure places. Even though you see school shootings all the time, they're pretty secure. Whereas a church, you have a whole lot of different mentalities. So I cover 10 counties. I go from all the way, basically from Monroe County all the way out to Seneca and basically all the way down to the Pennsylvania border. I'm basically a one-man show. I try and do as much as I can, but obviously, this works out good because most of the time I'm doing stuff during the day, so doing things at night, it makes it a little easier. One of the attitudes I get is that this will never happen here. It happens other places. It happens in Texas or California, but it won't happen in Auburn. That's the one mentality. If you have that mentality, I want to break you of it. Because I would say the biggest lesson I ever learned was when Sandy Hook happened. Prior to Sandy Hook, if you told me somebody'd walk in that building and put a gun to all those cute little kids and teachers, I would have said, not in a million years. High school, yeah, definitely. Middle school, maybe. Elementary school, no. I wouldn't even worry about it. And after that event happened, I realized, okay, we need to be ready anytime, anywhere, any place. So our goal today is to create basically a safe place for you to worship, for you to, keep yourselves together and pray and do all those types of things and feel safe about it. And ideally, I want you to be aware of your surroundings. And that's just you being a person out there in the world. Being aware of your surroundings is critical. Knowing what's normal for your church, what's normal for your workplace, what's normal for your home, and being able to spot when something is outside the realm of that normal. And having a plan in case the unimaginable happens. Having a plan is huge. If you have no plan and you wait for you to be in that emergency and say, okay, there's a person with a gun coming through that door, what's my nearest door? Is that door go out to anywhere? Can I hide in there? Does it lock? If I have to make those decisions under duress when this is happening, I'm probably not going to make the best decisions. If I already know, okay, I can go through that door and get outside or get to a window, or I can barricade that door. If I already know that, the second I identify a threat, I'm in that closet or whatever it is. Can you play the video?
Callers indicating she thinks there's someone shooting in the building.
Frightening headlines across America. 2 high school shootings in one day.
A high school sophomore being attacked by a junior cheerleader.
County 911. Oh my God, my friend has been shot. Okay, what was he shot with? A shotgun. How old is he? He's 16.
A funeral is being held this morning in Florida for Rebecca Sedgwick. The 6th grader committed suicide last week. Authorities say she suffered nearly a year of cyberbullying.
They say he attacked another 14-year-old on Thursday as he was walking home from school.
A high school football favorite opens fire in a cafeteria, killing one and injuring others.
Supposedly he tweeted about it last night. No one took him serious. I think he said that he was going to bring a gun to school, and I think everyone just kind of blew it off like he was joking.
Minutes before firing his gun into a crowded cafeteria, he sent family members a text message.
The latest crime involves Apex High, where a student is accused of tweeting a threat to shoot up the school.
The Sandy Hook Promise. A bunch of parents started that organization after Sandy Hook, and that's one of their videos. And the reason I like that one is because how many times after an active shooter the first thing that happens is generally FBI comes in, they start downloading the computer, they start downloading the cell phone, and looking at what this person was doing, what they were posting, what they're researching, and all of a sudden they find out that they're researching Columbine. They were posting pictures of them with a gun. They were posting threats that they were going to shoot up a place or things like that. Like if you take the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooter, he literally said, "I'm going to be the next school shooter," on a I believe it was an Instagram video or something along those lines. And no one really took it seriously. So that's why I like that video. Once these people have a grievance and they start going down that pathway of violence, there are signs generally. And if you can spot when somebody's starting to go off the tracks, intervene with that. That's our goal. So, what is an active shooter? The agreed upon definition is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined populated area. The FBI rules out the confined part and just goes to the populated area. If you're thinking of like the worst active shooter event we've had in the U.S. right now is Las Vegas, the Harvest Festival, where they killed, I want to say it's 59 people were killed, and I can't remember how many were injured. They're looking for those populated areas, lots of targets, things like that. Where can it happen? Literally anywhere. I can give you an example of almost any place you can think of. I can probably give you an event or an example of it. Statistics. Basically, one of the things we're finding throughout the stats is that over time, these attackers are getting better at causing casualties. And basically what they're doing is looking at past events, Columbine, the Aurora movie theater. They're looking at what happened, what techniques those people used, and then they're trying to improve on them. Where do these types of situations happen? Usually it's at places of work and places of education. Why? Because that's generally the two places that we're at. If you're student age, you're probably in school studying. If you're adult age, you're probably working. So a lot of times that's where these events happen. They do happen in churches, not as much, but something to be aware of, that usually places of employment and places of education. I'll skip over that one. So, two events that changed my outlook on life and safety. 9/11 was probably the first one that really hit me. I was a young state trooper at the time. I was probably had 3 years on, came out on 98. And I had been to New York City as a high schooler. I had been there a couple times with my parents. I'd seen it. It was in my state. And up until this point, all these terrorist attacks that I've ever read about or heard about or in history were in somebody else's backyard. They're in a different state. They're somewhere else. But when 9/11 happened, that was my backyard. I had been there before. I've known people from there. And that one really hit home for me. That these things can happen. And even though you never think of a terrorist attack prior to that happening in New York City, unfortunately, New York City is a target. And that being said, so is New York State. And Sandy Hook, I already explained. Probably the biggest reason Sandy Hook hit me hard is that I have 4 kids at home. That's why I'm still working. And my oldest was about 11 at the time, and my second oldest was about 5. So they are both in that time frame. My 5-year-old could have been one of those faces right there. So that's why Sandy Hook really had an impact on me. So why churches? Why would somebody target a church? It may be because of minimal security. Most churches want to be inviting. You don't want to feel like you're going into a prison and to worship. So you want to bring people in. You want to encourage people to come in the doors and see what you have to offer. So it's a very open and friendly, and which usually means minimal security. Predictable time schedules. So if you know that the Mass is at this time and this time, it's very easy to predict when the majority of people are going to be there. Large gatherings. Sometimes people disagree with what you believe. And I was just explaining, I was down in a church in Elmira that has some very different views, and because of those views, they are often targeted. Right now, it's just on social media, people reaching out and expressing their disbeliefs with what they believe. So sometimes people may just want to attack you because of your beliefs or your religion or whatever it is. Outside incidents, sometimes things happen outside that stem in. It could be a domestic situation, and all of a sudden it rolls into your church or your office or things like that. And again, churches are soft targets. Some examples of prior church shootings: Emmanuel African Methodist in North Carolina, 21-year-old killed 8 people with a handgun. November 5th, 2017, 26-year-old killed 26 people, wounded 20 with a Ruger semi-automatic 5.56. The mosque, Christchurch mosque shooting of 2019, 50 killed. I believe that was overseas. I forget which. New Zealand, yes, thank you. That was a big one. Here are some other ones. 11 killed, 6 wounded in Pittsburgh. 25-year-old charged with killing a woman and wounding 6 others in Tennessee. So you can see all these different events that have happened. These things do happen. Like I said, the chances of them happening are slim, but they do happen. So I want you to at least get in that mode that you understand that I at least need to be prepared in case this happens. It's probably never going to happen, but let me have some type of idea of what I would do. So some of the things that changed for law enforcement. Columbine was a big one. Prior to Columbine, if we got that call, the first 2 officers, one would probably set up security on one side of the building, one would be on the other side of the building. They would call for the SWAT team, wait for 5 to 6 officers to get up there. Then they would systematically enter the building and clear each room until they got to the active shooter and address the situation there. What we found out in Columbine is the longer it took us to get through the door, the more deaths and more injuries that were happening. So now our policy is to go, the first cop on scene is going straight in. If he hears gunshots or she hears gunshots, they're going straight to the gunshots, addressing the problem, taking out the threat, and then coming back and helping other people out. That's why Uvalde was a travesty. They did not do what they were trained to do in that situation. Obviously I wasn't there, I wasn't on scene, I don't know all the details, but I do know the way we train is not how they did things there. Virginia Tech, for a very long time, Virginia Tech was the worst school shooting in the United States for quite some, actually the worst active shooter event for quite some time until Las Vegas happened. A lot of incidents. I had the opportunity to hear 2 speakers. One was Christina Anderson. She was the most wounded survivor, shot 3 times, and was able to make it through that incident. And then Lisa Hemp, who was another survivor that was able to, she was in a room that was barricaded. They had no locks on the door, which has changed since then. But at the time, they had no locks on the door. The kids were laying on the floor, pushing their feet against the desk and pushing the door shut, and were able to fend off the attacker there. And then this is the Las Vegas Fest, the worst active shooter event so far in criminal history. I have a great video. Unfortunately, it's not in this presentation because we don't have time for it. But it shows how the active shooter here got 27 bags over a 7-day period into his hotel room and planned this plot, and they still have no idea, to my knowledge, why this guy did it. It just seems like he just wanted to kill a lot of people. So, 10 findings. The Secret Service back in the early 2000s, just after Sandy Hook, I want to say it was shortly after Sandy Hook, the Secret Service did this survey with the state education department, and they came up with these 10 findings. These incidents are rarely sudden. Somebody doesn't just wake up one day and decide, I'm going to kill a bunch of people. Generally, they start with a grievance, it develops over time, they start developing a plan, they go down this pathway of violence, they start researching things and compiling things and practicing, and then they carry out their mission. Prior, most of these incidents, somebody knew about the plan. Somebody heard, whether it was a tweet or a Snapchat, whatever it was, somebody often was tipped off about the plan, maybe not completely, but should have recognized some signs. Most attackers don't directly threaten their target. There's no accurate profile, can't tell you what an active shooter is going to look like, height, weight, size, ethnicity, all those types of things. Most attackers engaged in activity that caused alarm prior to the event. How many times after an active shooter event do you see people say, yeah, we always worried about that kid. We always were concerned that he was acting really weird. We wondered why he was shooting squirrels in the backyard or things like that. All those things generally don't come out until afterwards. And then we're like, wow, that would have been great to know if it happened before. Personal loss, failure, or real or perceived grievance. Usually somewhere's in there is what starts this process. They have some grievance, whether it's they have a grievance against your religion, they have a grievance against your business or what it represents, or they have a personal grievance against you, whatever the case is. Usually that's what starts this spitballing effect, where they have this buildup where they want to create an event like this. Attackers often felt bullied or persecuted, especially our school attackers. They often were picked on, were outsiders, were outcast in school, and now all of a sudden they get a weapon, and now they're the most important person in the room. And so they want to, get some vengeance on people that they feel were mistreating them. Most attackers had access or used weapons. If we get a school threat, we look into it. The first thing we look at is, does this kid have access to a weapon, or does this person have access to a weapon? If they don't, it changes things. It's not as dire, but if they do have, their father hunts and they have hunting rifles all over the place, or they do have a weapon, or they're showing a weapon that they have on Instagram or TikTok or something like that, that's where we really got to be concerned. Many cases, others were involved in the attack. The Canandaigua Academy years ago, if anyone's familiar with that event, that kid had a written up suicide note saying that he was going to kill because he liked to kill, and he wasn't bullied or anything like that. He just wanted to kill people. And for whatever reason, he had someone help him. Whether they knew they were helping him do what he planned to do is unknown. But somehow he had a student open a side door for him. He came in the side door. He had a shotgun wrapped in jeans. So obviously it probably looked awkward, like, what are you carrying that's wrapped in jeans? He went into the bathroom and ended up committing suicide, if you're not familiar with the story. But it wouldn't have taken much for him he had written the note that he said he was going to do it. For whatever reason, he took his own life. So how I teach active shooter response is we kind of borrowed this concept from a book called Left to Bang. If there's any military people in here, it was a book written by a Marine Corps lieutenant. I wish I could remember his name because the book is really, it's a short book, which I like because I'm a military guy. I don't like to read a lot. And it's pretty easy to read. It's a good book. But he wrote it for his soldiers out in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're getting constantly attacked by small arms fire and by getting attacked by roadside bombs, things like that. And they wanted to give their soldiers some type of training where they could kind of spot when something, an attack was potentially going to happen, and to kind of spot violence before it happened. So what they came up with this left to bang theory, and basically everything on the left side is what leads up to the moment of violence. So, if we're talking about a school shooting, maybe the kid gets bullied, he gets beat up in the locker room. All of a sudden, he finds a weapon. Now he decides he's going to do a school shooting. He starts practicing. He starts finding out where he can get ammunition. Now he's researching how he can build a pipe bomb. And there's this whole pathway that leads up to that moment of violence. And the goal is at some point down that pathway that we intervene at some point, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's someone, maybe he needs help, maybe he needs counseling. He needs somebody to show him that this isn't the way to do things. And hopefully we stop that. Then there's the right side of the violence, and that's the side that we don't want to happen. We want it. Unfortunately, you can't stop everything from happening. So it's important to know how to prevent violence, but once violence does happen, we need to know what to do. So in the general population, we teach to run, hide, fight, which we're going to get into shortly. So that was the basic premise behind our left to bang theory, and that's kind of why we took that theory and kind of applied it to schools, businesses, churches, things like that. So the way I see it, you have two basic types of threats. You have your external threat and you have your internal threat. The external threat, that's the outsider. That's the person you've never seen before. That's the person that, everybody turns around and looks, oh, I don't recognize that person. Now, in the church, it's a little bit different because you're opening your doors to everybody. So it's not uncommon to have some external person coming in. Whereas in a school, if you're not a teacher or a student and you don't have a badge that says a visitor or something on it, then it's a serious issue. In a church, it's a little bit different, so it's more difficult to determine that. And then you have the internal threat. Now that's the person that comes with you to church, that worships with you, that sits through everything, that knows all your ins and outs of this building, that knows how you worship and what times and how you would respond in an emergency and all those types of things. The more difficult one is the internal threat to combat. Can you play this video?
And the first thing I'm doing is I'm catching the sight lines and looking for an exit.
I see the exit sign too. I'm not worried. I mean, you were shot. People do all kinds of weird and amazing stuff when they're scared.
I can tell you the license plate numbers of all 6 cars outside. I can tell you that our waitress is left-handed and the guy sitting up at the counter weighs 215 pounds and knows how to handle himself. I know the best place to look for a gun is the cab of the gray truck outside. And at this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking. Now, why would I know that?
Essentially because he's Jason Bourne. But how many of us are Jason Bourne? I share his name, but I am not on his level. I'd love to be. So we got to take an honest look at our church. What are some weaknesses? What are some benefits? What are some good things that we have in place? What are some things that we might need to improve on? Things like that. I like to think of it as protecting your castle. So if this was my castle back in the old days, and that was my little bridge there, maybe I have a drawbridge. If I'm protecting that castle, I want everybody to come over that one bridge. That's why it's there. That's why I'm on that little island. I want to see everybody coming into my building. If I don't like the person approaching my building, maybe I pull up the drawbridge, I put some little archers on top, and they start launching arrows. But I want control, and I want access control. I want everybody coming in that one point of entry and leaving in that one point of entry. So that's kind of how I relate it. The perimeter is the first and most important thing. One thing I learned in the military, anytime we were doing a march or a hike or anything like that, and we were going to set up a stopping point, the first thing we did was set up the perimeter security. If you don't have security around your perimeter, then you don't have security. So limiting entry points, like I said, it's difficult with the church. On times when you're having mass or whatever, maybe having a few more doors open is fine. But generally, outside those times, you really want to limit making sure that you have one point of entry. If you don't have visibility on certain points, having cameras is nice. Real or fake, they kind of keep people in check. Security alarms are great. If you have an emergency alarm where you can hit and let people know that there's something going on, those are always good. Greeters are probably the best defense for churches because greeters can come off as very inviting and warming, yet there also can be physically, if you have the right greeters, be assessing everyone and basically scanning. The first thing I do, the two things I'm always concerned about in a law enforcement security standpoint is people's hands and their belt lines. Those are my two main focuses. I want to see if you have a weapon in your hands. As a cop, I'm worried about two things, getting shot and getting stabbed. If I see no gun and no knife, I know at least for the moment you're not a deadly threat, unless you're like Bruce Lee or something. So if I see the hands are empty and I see there's nothing suspicious in the belt line, working in Rochester, I made a lot of gun arrests, and I can say almost all the guns I pulled off people were in the belt line or in the pockets. I've never seen an ankle holster. I've never seen anything up top. It's always been in that belt line area. Securing doors and windows when not in use is ideal. And then window film can prevent people from smashing windows. It just takes a lot longer for you to get through. That's an example of window film. If you're going to smash the window film, with the window film, it would take you a very long time, if not at all. And anything you can do to slow down that attacker speeds up our response as far as law enforcement goes. Again, panic buttons are great. Communications. Can you communicate in this building? Can you let people know that there's an emergency, whether it's a weather emergency or a active threat, whatever the case is? That's always ideal. Creating like a safety team in your church is a great idea. I know that churches, like a lot of times, you have some people that aren't security-minded people, and then you have some that are highly security-minded people. Just having at least a couple of people that are a little bit better trained, and if you look at your church, a lot of times you have former law enforcement, former military, just people that are naturally good at security or bouncers or whatever it is, and you have that team that can kind of shepherd everybody. If something is an emergency, you have that rock that says, okay, everybody out that door right now. Because a lot of times people will freeze. And I can tell you, it happens in the military and law enforcement. You'll see people freeze in the moment of action. And it's really hard to predict. And all it takes is that one person to say, we're doing this, let's go. And everybody follows, and it's good. So again, creating that security team is critical. Situational awareness of everybody. And it's funny, like my experiences throughout my life, high school, military, law enforcement, some people that you would never think would be situationally aware are highly in tuned with what's going on around them. So some people really have a gift, but being able to spot when something just doesn't seem right is critical. And play this video.
Here's your challenge. How many riders in green jump the ramps? Go.
Riders in green. Anyone get it?
5 riders in green jump the ramps. But did you notice the unicyclist? How about the hidden message? Did you see that? Did you notice the man dropping the suspicious backpack?
That's one we're looking for.
Your next challenge, be aware of your surroundings.
So, I like to use this video. That's Homeland Security's PSA for See Something, Say Something after 9/11. They have probably about 10 to 15 different ones that they have on their website. That one I like the best because is there anything illegal about placing a backpack by a garbage can? No, absolutely not. However, that being said, is there something suspicious about that? I would say yes. That is my backpack. Generally, I don't leave it out of my sight unless there's somebody around it that I trust. So why would somebody place a backpack by a garbage can and walk away from it? You could say, well, maybe they just found it. They thought it'd be a common place to look for it is by the garbage can, and maybe that's why they put it there. Or there could be a pressure cooker in it, and maybe it's going to be like the Boston City Marathon bombing, and it's going to detonate. So I want to get you to the point where you see that, you say there's something wrong with that person placing that there, and then at least get somebody else's eyes on it. Maybe somebody that's on your security team, maybe just your other half. Hey, did you see that guy walk away from that bag? What? That's kind of interesting. Let's have somebody check that out. And that's where I want to get you. So again, I talked about the greeters being the watchdogs. They are the best part. Like I said, you can have them being overly greeting everybody. And it's funny, I used to have a partner, his name's Angel Quintero, and he was from New York City. And every time he'd see everybody, he would go up, he'd give him a big hug. And I was like, wow, you barely know that guy, and you're giving him a hug. He's like, yeah, I'm just sizing him up. I'm seeing first of all, how much muscle does he have? Does he got a weapon around his waist? And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, that's on a different level than I was at. And that was one of the guys I worked in the city of Rochester. So I was like, wow, that's some good stuff right there that me coming from suburbia Connecticut blew my mind. I'm like, what? You're sizing people up. But yeah, he's like, I want to know if they're, how strong they are, this and that. So I was like, wow, that's good. So if you see something, say something. That's obviously everybody knows that by now. But the biggest factor is, we know who you saw, what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it. But the most important thing for you to tell us is why it's suspicious to you. Because you know what's normal for this church. I don't know what's normal for this church. I know it's normal for average churches, but this specific church, I don't know what's normal. So if you can tell me, this is what I saw, when I saw it, where I saw it, and this is who I saw, but this is why it's suspicious, because normally when people come into our church, they do this, and this guy did that. And I'm like, okay, now I'm tracking, now I get why you're calling me. Years ago, I sat through a presentation, and I was a young parent. Matter of fact, I might have been just a stepfather at the time. And it was put on by this network called Child Abuse Network. And basically what they did is they're a group in Rochester. They went around to churches in Rochester and would talk to parents and basically teach them how to spot when violence or something wrong was going wrong with their kids. And what the investigator, he solely worked against crimes against children. And what he said is every day when your kid gets home from school, ask them how their day went. And he says, think of yourself as a polygrapher. So a polygrapher will ask questions they know the answer to, that you're very comfortable. So if I was sitting down for my polygraph, which I took one to get on this job, is your name Jason? Yes. Is your hair brown? Yes. And I'm comfortable answering all those questions. Yes, yes, yes. Then they ask you something that you're not comfortable with. So basically they set up that baseline for what's normal. So all those questions that you answer yes to, yep, I have brown hair, green eyes, 5'8", yep, got it. Then they answer, once they get that baseline, they ask tougher questions. And if everybody thinks of this as a lie detector. It's not really a lie detector. It just determines when there's an anomaly, something that deviates from what's normal. So when they ask you maybe a question about your drinking past or your drug history, and all of a sudden you spike, and now you're sweating, your heart rate's up, you're nervous, and that machine will give you a large spike, and now the investigator knows something was different from all those other questions I asked. Something at that last question really got to you. And now we need to figure out why. And so it's the same thing when your kid gets off the bus. How'd your day go? Good, scored a goal in gym today. How'd your day go? Good, I got an A in art. How'd your day go? And you develop that baseline so that one day when the kid sprints upstairs and slams the door shut, you got a spike. Okay, something happened that was different today. Now we got to figure out what it is. And I bring that into your church and into your workplaces. You know, when you're constantly seeing people that go to this church, hey, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing? You're developing that baseline for all your friends, all your fellow worshipers and things like that to know what's their normal. So when you do get that spike and they fly off the handle and start telling you about the divorce they're going through or the DWI they got the other night or whatever it is, you can start to, okay, there's something different going on here. Is it something serious or is it something minor? So, patterns of change, going from the best employee to worst employee, problems at home, domestic incidents, financial problems, medical problems, maybe they got a bad diagnosis that's really sent them down a bad path, drugs or alcohol, writing down a plan or even texting a plan or posting social media, talking bad or maybe just sounding off that you're really angry and you're going down a bad pathway, things like that. And no support system. Maybe you're going through a divorce, no support system at home and no one to help you talk through this, no close friends, all these things. Now, these are just things to look for. If you exhibit all those, doesn't mean that you're going to be an active shooter. It's basically like when we talk about heart attacks, if you eat garbage food and you don't work out and you don't do all this, yeah, you're more susceptible to have a heart attack. Does it mean you're going to? No. So years ago, I live in a very small 32-home dead-end cul-de-sac, and of those 32 homes, probably 10 or 12 of those houses are owned by law enforcement, fire, security, employed people, or retired people. So our neighborhood is very tight, very close-knit. My neighbor was a state trooper at the time. He's since moved out. I was a little disturbed about that, but it's all right. So my neighbor, I'm working. He's off duty. He calls me up. It's in the afternoon. I'm still working. He calls me up, says, hey, Jay, there's somebody walking through your yard with a hoodie, and it looks like a rifle. I was like, that's not cool. So I call my wife up, tell her to go in the basement and lock the doors with the kids, and I fly home. Meanwhile, he's an off-duty trooper. He puts on his off-duty gun, throws a hoodie over it. It's in the fall, and he goes out and confronts this kid. It turns out that it was actually a high-powered pellet gun, not a rifle, and the kid was squirrel hunting in our yard. I've got a ginormous oak tree, which the squirrels absolutely love, and this kid was trying to take advantage of that. We kind of explained to him that we like our squirrels and leave them alone. But I bring that point up because if that was your house, how would you address that? If you saw let's take the gun out of it, because you're probably not an off-duty cop, so take the gun out of it. You just see a strange kid in a hoodie walking around in your yard. Are you going to do something? Most likely, I would say most people at least, maybe go out there and confront them. If they're not comfortable with that, maybe got a big burly biker neighbor next door. I got one of those too. Have him go check it out. Or maybe you just put down the window and say, hey, what are you doing in my yard? Or maybe you call 911 and say, hey, there's a suspicious person in my yard. But ideally, you're probably going to do something. So then I bring that into the church, if you see someone that just doesn't look right, are you going to say, hey, how you doing? And you don't have to be confrontational. Hey, how you doing? Can I help you? Do you need to find anything in here? Or can I show you where we worship? Or whatever it is, you can seem inviting, yet also inquisitive. A lot of these people, when they're looking to commit crimes, they want to case the place out, figure out where the best place to attack is. And I can't tell you how many times a security guard that's just overbearing comes over, hey, how you doing? And people don't want to be paid attention to if they're trying to case the place out and things like that. So being that overly friendly person can work. A friend of mine teaches workplace violence out in California, and he uses this picture all the time. He says, is there anything wrong? Let's say that van is yours, and then you've never seen this van before. It just happens to be parked there as your end of work, or maybe you're going out at the end of the night tonight, and you see that van parked right next to your van. Is there a problem there? I ask people, how would you handle that situation? Well, I'm squeezing in. Some people handle it that way. Some people say, well, I'd get in the passenger side. Other people say, I would hit the car alarm, see if anyone moves. It could be just somebody that can't park, and there's plenty of those people around. Or it could be somebody trying to channel you into a dangerous situation. Maybe you want to get a security guard if you have one and have you walked out, or maybe just call 911, say, hey, there's a suspicious vehicle parked next to mine, I'm kind of nervous about it, that type of thing. But again, having that pause where you see something and you say, something isn't right here. What is it? So, years ago, when I was a little kid, I was in the Boy Scouts, and my father was my Boy Scout leader. And he would often take us night hiking, which was one of the things I hated. And he always asked me, why are you so afraid to hike at night? It's the same thing, it's just darker out. And I used to tell my father, I was like, well, I'm afraid to get eaten by a bear. And my dad would tell me, don't look like bear food then. I'm like, what kind of answer is that? But over the years, I've kind of recognized what he was talking about. And it's one of the things, if you don't want to be a victim, don't look like a victim. And a lot of times, if you don't look like an easy target, if you're aware, if you're standing upright, you're making eye contact with people, and you don't look like an easy target, a lot of times you won't be. These people that commit crimes, they're not looking to mess with a former Navy SEAL or some martial arts expert. They're looking for somebody that's an easy target. I can tell you when I worked down near New York City, I was working with an NYPD cop one time, and he said, oh, I got an apple picker. I'm like, what's an apple picker? And he said, well, when people are walking down New York City, a lot of the outsiders, they're looking at their phones, not paying attention, and what the city kids will do is they'll run by, grab the phone, and sprint down the street, and before these people realize that their phone's even gone, that the person's like 6 blocks away. So it's one of those things, being situationally aware, being proud, making eye contact, all those types of things, and not looking like an easy target. Often take a look at your physical environment. While that is very efficient, it's probably not tactically secure. Having your back to a door, if you want to make a cop uncomfortable, invite him out to lunch and then have him sit in the center of the restaurant with his back to the door. Drives us nuts. We want to sit in the corner somewheres where we're near an exit and we can see everybody entering and exiting, and we want nobody behind us. So setting up your environment. Probably the most important thing, and I don't care, this isn't just for active shooter, this is for any type of emergency. Knowing, if you're in a building, knowing where your exits are is critical. Think about when we get on a plane. What's the first thing they do? They teach you the intricate workings of a seatbelt, and then they show you where your nearest exits are. So knowing that in an emergency, if I know that my nearest exit is right there, the second I identify I'm in an emergency, I'm gone. If I have to make that decision and I don't know where my nearest exit is, or 2 exits, I may think that might be one, or is that one, or is that one? Where would my nearest one? I'm not going to make a great decision. And I also say entrances too. If you go outside and all of a sudden hear gunshots outside, you need to know how to get back in that building as quick as possible. The most important thing, I would say, next to exits and entrances are locks. If you have a door that locks or a door that you can barricade, I'll give you this one stat from Michael Dorn. He runs Safe Havens International. I had the opportunity to listen to him speak multiple times, and he's one of those guys that puts up all his information, says, hey, if you have any questions, call me. I'm that guy that calls you. I called him up, and I said to him, I heard you say this one stat. I just want to make sure I heard it right so that I can reuse it. And he said only one time in U.S. history has somebody entered a locked or barricaded door in an active shooter event and killed somebody inside, and that was Red Lake, Minnesota. So that tells me if I can get behind a locked or barricaded door, the chances are that person is not going to spend 5-10 minutes trying to kick in one door. They're going to move on to the next target. So, if you know that you're not a runner and you know you can get behind that door and get it locked, your chances of survival are very, very, very good. How to deal with angry people, I relate it to alcohol. Think about when you're dealing with a drunk. I know you said you bounced a little bit. How many times you get with a drunk and they keep talking in circles and circles and circles, and they become angry and agitated. You can't deal with them until you get them calmed down, basically get them sober. It's very difficult to do. Personal safety, one of the biggest things, and it's easier said than done, is remain calm. It's very hard to get somebody else to be calm if you're not calm. Trying to act like you know what you're doing, you've been there before. I can tell you as a cop, my first couple of years on the job, like the second we show up in uniform, everybody expects us to know what to do. They don't know if I've got 1 year on the job or 25 years on the job. They just know I'm the trooper and I got to have the answers. They teach us a lot in the academy, but they don't teach us everything. You learn a lot as you go. So we have to basically act like we've been there before 1,000 times, even though I may be sitting there going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's happening right now. I have to act like I'm in control. I already talked about the hands. The hands are the most important thing in any kind of confrontation. Good cop, bad cop. I love this, especially for workplaces, but if you have somebody that is super angry and they're dealing with one person, and they're super mad, they're super angry, they're confrontational, and they hate this person, often bringing in somebody else to diffuse. I'll give you an example. When you arrest somebody, generally, they don't like being arrested. It's really weird. So I've arrested this person. Let's say I DWI'd this person. I put them in cuffs, and now I have to fingerprint them, photograph them, and ask them personal questions about their height, their weight, their relationship, whether they're married, blah, blah. I have to fill out my little arrest report with all that information on there. A lot of times they don't want to deal with me, and they're angry at me. So what will happen is I'll have this person, they'll be confrontational, and all of a sudden I'll have another trooper come in. And that trooper will come over and be like, hey, when I'm out of the range, they'll be like, hey, I don't like Trooper Klewicki either. I can barely work with him. Just let me fingerprint and photograph you. I'll get you out of here. You won't have to deal with that guy anymore. Just talk to me. You don't have to worry about it. And it smooths it out. And all of a sudden, they still hate me, which I'm fine with. As long as I can get them processed and out, I'm good. And now that other person has built a rapport. So if you've got that one person that just doesn't, button heads, bring that other person in to help them out. Anytime you're concerned, don't feel bad to call 911. We'd much rather get called to something than have to get called after something happens. Another thing is knowing your limits. So a lot of times somebody will be doing something that's out of control. If you don't let them know, hey, what you just did right there, it's not cool. If you keep doing that, we're going to have to call law enforcement, we're going to have to call security, whatever it is. Let them know where that line is so that if they continue to cross it, it's on them. De-escalation tips, be empathetic. You don't have to understand why they're mad, but you can understand they're mad. We all understand emotions. We understand when somebody's sad or mad or whatever. So you can understand and empathize, okay, I understand you're mad, but this is not the way to go about it. Respect personal space, and that does two things. That keeps, some people don't like to have people on top of them, especially when they're angry. And then it also gives you a little bit of distance because you don't want to be up close if somebody's going to start swinging, things like that. Avoid overreacting. The first time I entered this, I had a typo and it said avoid overeating. Either one can get you in trouble. You don't want to do either one, but avoid overreacting. Try and keep your cool. That's one of the biggest things. It's very hard to get mad at somebody that's super chill, super cool, and has that Zen type focus. Ignore challenging questions. Sometimes they may have a legitimate gripe, and you may be like, I don't blame you why you're mad. Again, set the limits, pick your battles, allow for silence, because they may be processing what you're telling them and things like that. And remember, if you're talking, you're often not fighting, which is good. One of the things I sat through a drug class years ago, and I'd like to point out, the dilated eyes could be cannabis, stimulants, hallucinogens. The eyes in the center are normal, and then the one on the far right is constricted. Usually heroin or opioids are the only things that do that. If somebody's on heroin or opioids, I'm not super concerned. Usually they're lethargic, they're very slow-moving, slow reacting. But the ones I'm concerned with are the super dilated saucer eyes. So if they're on a hallucinogen and they're not seeing reality the way reality is, and they're seeing you as somebody that could be, a dinosaur, or who knows what, that can be a challenge. That's when you need to call somebody for help. So, almost done. I apologize. I know we're running over. So active shooter awareness. I relate it to a hurdle event. The more hurdles you can put in the attacker's way, the slower they're going to be and the closer law enforcement will be to responding. Roughly, I want to say law enforcement response to these types of events is 5 to 8 minutes. So if you can shut a door and push a cabinet in front of it, and it slows them down 5 minutes, that's 5 minutes closer that law enforcement is to you. So time is the biggest factor. The quicker you react, the quicker you do something, the better off you're going to be, and the more you slow them up, the better off you're going to be. So time is probably the biggest factor. React immediately. Don't go in that denial phase. Can you play a video?
If you ever have the misfortune to be in an active shooter event, you deserve to survive. In our research, we have found that the actions that potential victims take during these events are critical to their survival. We have identified 3 options that have proven effective in many events. These are: avoid the attacker.
He's gone.
Deny the attacker access to your area. Defend yourself. It is a personal decision, but you have a right to do so. Avoiding the attacker starts with being aware of your surroundings at all times and knowing what is going on around you.
Something that
If you
deviates
see
from what's
or hear
normal.
something that looks suspicious,
Now he
take
sees
action.
a gun, and
For
he's
example,
out of there like
the stalker
Forrest Gump.
took immediate and effective action to protect
Down the
himself
longest
when
hallway
he observed
ever.
the shooter pulling out weapons from the bag. Others, however, hesitated, and this hesitation can cost them valuable time that they could have used to get away from the
Got a
threat.
deal on cologne. It's probably not a gunshot, right?
If you hear something that is, or could be, gunfire, start trying to get away from it as soon as possible. Gunfire has a distinctive sound. Inside of buildings, the sound can be muffled or distorted.
This is very true. Gunshots don't always sound
A single
like
loud
gunshots.
bang could be a person dropping something,
The pallet would get my
or
attention.
even thunder.
Thunder, I don't think would.
But repeated loud bangs are much more likely to be gunfire. Additionally, look at the reaction of others. Are they startled or scared? Are they running?
He's got the
What
best
are they
scared
saying?
face ever.
Any one of these events individually may create denial, but when put together should create a heightened awareness and stimulate an immediate response. It is important that you know how to get out. The situation will be chaotic and rapidly changing. In general, you will want to go to the nearest exit. But you must also understand that the closest exit may not be accessible or safe to use. If this is the case, go to a different exit. While avoiding the threat, consider the uses of cover and concealment. Cover offers protection from gunfire, while concealment minimizes your exposure to the attacker. Try to keep objects between you and the attacker. If you can't avoid the attacker, sometimes the best option will be to deny the attacker access to your location. In many locations, this can be accomplished by closing and locking a door, such as they did in the meeting room. Locking the door has proven effective in many attacks. If the door does not have a lock, you can place heavy objects in front of it. Remember, barricades work best if the door opens toward you. If it doesn't, use things that are readily available.
It's a great way to secure a door if you don't have a lock.
Belts, or objects that can be used to block or secure the door to make it difficult for the attacker to enter the door.
For those type of doors.
This may at least
if you have
slow
something on
the
wheels,
attacker down
tip it on side.
and give you time to identify alternate means of escape, such as adjoining rooms or windows. When attempting to deny access to your location, you want to make it appear that there is no one in your area. Lock doors, turn off the lights, silence your phones, and get out of sight. Your attempt to deny the attacker access to your location might fail.
The gunman's coming. What are we going to do? We're going to have to defend ourselves.
Have a backup plan about what you will do. In many cases, this may be to defend yourself. You need to be in a place where you can act if the attacker comes into your location. In most rooms, you will line up against the same wall that the door is on.
I'd be a little farther away from the wall.
Near the door so you can react, but not directly in front of it. If you are unable to avoid or deny, your best option may be to defend yourself by using whatever is available. In a situation where someone is attempting to
keep in mind this is Walmart and they have every tool accessible. Don't know if you'd have that in your church, but
attack weak spots such as eyes, throat, and groin.
They circled them in case you didn't know
Fight
where they were.
to the best of your ability, and do not quit until the attacker is stopped. This is what the workers in the warehouse did when they were unable to avoid the attacker and felt their lives were in immediate danger. Whatever option you choose, call 911.
All right, so that gives you a basic overview. That program is called CRAZE, Civilian Response to Active Shooter Events. I actually got certified to teach it, and then they made it an online program, so it kind of defeated the purpose of me going through the training. But it was good training. It's online. You can get it through, I have the website at the very end. One of the things I want you to know is, okay, if this situation does happen, active shooter event, whatever it is, and police are entering. Like I said, the most important thing we look for is hands. We don't know who the attacker is. It could be anybody, could be an adult, could be a teenager, could be anyone. So show us you're not a threat, show us your hands, that you have no weapons, and then we will likely direct you to go out the way we just came in, because that's the way we cleared up to. But that's the most important thing. When law enforcement enters, our first mission is to take out the threat. If we don't take the threat out, we're going to likely become victims as well. So just understand that. Show us your hands. Show us you're not a threat. We'll take you out or tell you which way to go out. Likely, it's going to be the same way. And once you get outside, there will likely be more fire, law enforcement, EMTs on scene, things like that. Stop the Bleed program is great to have, to know how to stop the bleed, whether it's a car accident or an active shooter event. If you can stop the bleed, you can save lives. And generally, it's free training you can get through Homeland Security or your local fire department. Having a reunification recovery spot, so if we have to evacuate everyone from this building, just having an idea of where we would go. Maybe there's a baseball field across the street or a fire department, whatever it is. If there's some site or another building that you could regroup and have everybody that was in the church get together, make sure you all made it over, and figure out how to recover from there and go from there. Like I said, planning is probably the biggest thing. If you can just visualize, if this probably will never happen, but if it ever does happen, this is what I do, how I would react, where I would go, where I would hide, what I would use as a weapon, whatever. If you can think of it in your mind, if it ever does happen, it's like you've already been there before, and you're going to be much quicker to respond. Whereas if you don't have a plan and you're now coming up with a plan on the fly, it's going to be very difficult. I use this analogy of a diver. I used to have a friend that dove. I was a swimmer, and he would, right before every dive, he'd close his eyes and visualize that whole dive. And I always asked him, I was like, does it really help you to just close your eyes and visualize it? And he said that every twist and turn in that dive was so much smoother because he had visualized it and literally felt like he just practiced it before he did it. And it's the same thing. If I can visualize what I would do, I'll be much quicker. You'll notice one thing that I did not mention any of these attackers. It was specifically done. I know all their names, or pretty much most of them, but I don't mention their names. I like to point out the heroes that responded and the victims. Those are the ones I want to remember. I don't want to remember the murders. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the what's important now concept. So I sat through this training years ago, put on by Valor, and they're an officer safety-based training company. And basically what they're doing is training us on how to be safer. Nothing new, nothing outside the realm of what we didn't know, but just how they presented it. But the way they presented this is the win concept. So when I'm getting ready for my day, I'm getting dressed, what's important now is putting on this bulletproof vest. If I get into a confrontation, a gunfight, this could save my life. Then I'm getting into my car. What's important now? Putting on my seatbelt. If I get into a pursuit, I'm doing over 120 miles an hour chasing somebody, and something goes wrong or if somebody cuts me off, it could be my life if I'm not wearing my seatbelt. Then maybe I'm speeding to work because I'm late, and I know my trooper that I'm going to relieve doesn't want to stay overtime. What's important now is driving there safely, getting there safely. Maybe I'm going to a complaint, and I'm doing 120 miles an hour to get to a trivial complaint. What's important now is getting there safely. So constantly going through your day and saying, okay, what's the next most important thing I need to accomplish? So I bring that into an active shooter event. If you're in this church and you hear a gunshot or something along those lines out in the hallway, okay, what's important now? Maybe it's getting out an exit, or maybe it's getting into a room where I can get the door locked. Okay, I'm in a room. What's important now? Getting the door locked. Okay, now I'm hidden. What's important now? Maybe it's calling 911. And constantly going through your emergency, saying, what's the next most important thing I need to accomplish? Do that, and then go on and keep on going through that. These are some of the sites I use for my research and putting this program together. Department of Homeland Security is a great site. They have a lot of great videos. Some of them are just too long to use. FBI is great for stats. They also have a lot of good videos. FEMA, if you want to do online training, I believe most of it is free, if not all of it. They do have an active shooter training you can do free online, I believe. Sandy Hook Promise, that's where that first video came from. Safe and Sound Schools, if you have kids in school, you want to know a little bit more about school safety, that's an excellent website started by Michelle Gay, who's a Sandy Hook mom that her daughter was taken in that event. Safe Schools Initiative with the Secret Service, they're the ones that did that study. And then Alert, that's the website I use for that longest video that's on the civilian response to active shooter events. You play last video, then we'll be out of here. I apologize. Go long.
I'm a firefighter.
A teacher.
I'm a farmer.
A manager.
I'm a barber.
A waitress. A student.
A mom.
We're all part of your community. We live in small towns and big cities.
On farmland and concrete.
Every day we move in and out of each other's busy lives.
It's easy to take for granted all the little details that make up our everyday.
The morning walk.
That familiar engine firing up.
The bus stop friends. A hot cup of coffee.
That guy who can never seem to parallel park.
Every day brings surprises.
Flat tire. Midday traffic.
Bus delays. Again. There's always something unexpected.
And honestly, that's fine.
It's when you experience a moment of uncertainty.
Something you know shouldn't be there.
Or someone's behavior that doesn't seem quite right.
These are the moments to take a pause.
Because if something doesn't feel right, it's probably not.
It's not about paranoia
or being afraid.
It's about standing up and protecting our communities.
One detail at a time.
because a lot of little details can become a pattern.
We
trust our instincts.
Just like you should.
Because only you know what's not supposed to be in your everyday.
We all play a role in keeping our communities safe.
So protect your everyday.
If you see something suspicious, say something to local authorities.
Another Homeland Security PSA. So, I know you probably, I went a little long today, I apologize. Got a late start too. If you have any questions, that's my email address up there. I also have my office phone. Feel free, call me, email me if you have any questions, if you need any references, if you're looking for anything. Reach out, I promise I'll get back to you. Other than that, if you have other people that are looking for presentations, I do anything you can imagine, from anything that has to do with safety and basically keeping people safe. Anything from driving, drugs, alcohol, you name it, I'll speak on it. Schools, community groups, whatever it is. But thank you for your time. You guys have been awesome, and have a great rest of your night. Thank you.